She gave her last cookie to a lonely stranger on a bench, not knowing he was the billionaire CEO who vanished from her mother's life and her real father. The air in the park was cool and quiet, the kind of early spring stillness that made the city feel far away. Birds chirped lazily from the trees. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and warming earth, and children's laughter rang out faintly from a nearby playground. Yet none of it reached the man sitting alone on the bench near the path. Nicholas Rain, 30 years old, billionaire, CEO, and one of the most talked about entrepreneurs in America, sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. His light shirt was neatly pressed, his dark trousers flawless, his shoes polished. From a distance, he looked like the picture of elegance. But up close, something was off. His eyes were tired, hollow, as if they hadn't seen rest in weeks. His jaw was clenched, his hands idle, resting limp between his knees. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not physically, not mentally, not in this state. Nicholas Rain didn't take days off, didn't disappear from boardrooms or headlines. But today, no one knew where he was. His assistant had canceled his meetings with a vague mention of a personal day, and he hadn't replied to a single message since sunrise. Not even his closest advisors knew that he had slipped away, walked 12 blocks alone, and sat himself on a park bench like an ordinary man trying to remember how it felt to simply breathe. It had been 3 months since his father's death. A man he barely knew, a cold, distant figure who had built an empire of industry and silence. When the will was read, it wasn't the inheritance that broke Nicholas. It was the sudden realization of how little he had truly mattered in the man's life. Not a single personal note, not a photo, not a sentence beyond formal division of wealth and property. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of a childhood he'd spent pretending didn't hurt. And then 2 weeks later, one of his boldest philanthropic ventures had collapsed. Publicly, painfully. A program to offer tech education in underserved communities had failed due to poor management. And overnight, Nicholas was painted in the media as a careless billionaire who made promises he couldn't keep. His image, once pristine, was now cracked. Headlines called him disconnected, emotionally absent, and all strategy, no soul. He began to believe it himself. So he ran, not far, just enough to be nowhere. Just enough to sit on a weathered wooden bench beneath a budding tree and feel anonymous for a few hours. He didn't notice the little girl at first. She had been watching him from the walkway, a few feet away, standing near the grass with a cookie in her hand. Her yellow dress fluttered slightly in the breeze, and her dark brown hair was tied up in 2 loose pigtails. She looked about 7, maybe younger. There was a small stuffed bunny peeking from her backpack, and she wore a curious expression, like she was trying to understand something very grown up. After a moment of hesitation, she walked over. Nicholas blinked as her small shadow appeared beside him. He turned his head and their eyes met. She didn't smile. She simply studied him, head tilted slightly. "You look really sad," she said. Her voice was light but steady. There was no fear in her, no doubt, just pure childlike honesty. Nicholas stared at her, momentarily speechless. She held out the cookie, wrapped in a crinkled napkin. "Here, it's my last one, but I think you need it more than me." He slowly took it from her hand. The cookie was still slightly warm. "Thank you," he said, his voice raspier than he expected. "I made them with my mom this morning," she said. "They're kind of soft, like the inside of banana bread, but with chocolate." He looked down at the cookie, then back at her. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied proudly. "What's yours?" He hesitated. "Nicholas." Emma smiled for the first time. "That's a grown-up name." He almost laughed. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, glancing around the empty space beside him. "No," he said. "Not really." She nodded as if she understood perfectly. Then she looked past him toward the tree line. "My mom's over there," she said, pointing. Nicholas followed her gaze, and then he saw her, a woman in a green dress standing by the edge of the path watching them. She looked elegant, composed, but her body was tense, her gaze fixed. As Nicholas stared, something shifted deep in his chest. His breath caught. He knew her. Emily Winston. It had been 6 years. 6 years since Lisbon. 6 years since one perfect night, one unforgettable conversation. full of laughter and depth and something neither of them could name at the time. She had sent him an email afterward. He hadn't answered. Life had taken him elsewhere. And now she was here, with a little girl, with Emma. And suddenly Nicholas realized this wasn't just a cookie. This was the beginning of something he never saw coming. Nicholas sat frozen on the bench, the cookie still resting in his hand, growing warm under the pressure of his fingers. His mind spun, but his body didn't move. Across the path, Emily hadn't looked away. She remained still, her arms gently crossed over her stomach, her eyes locked on him and the little girl who had just offered a piece of her world without knowing who he truly was. And yet, maybe she did. Children sense things that adults refuse to admit. Emma, oblivious to the weight of the silence between her mother and Nicholas, continued speaking. She says you shouldn't talk to strangers unless you offer them something first, she explained innocently, gesturing to the cookie. So I did. Nicholas smiled faintly, but there was a tremor in it. She's very wise, he replied. Emma nodded confidently. She knows everything, but she doesn't smile much lately. That made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just the words. It was the easy way they were said. The casual, unfiltered sadness of a child too observant for her age. Something inside him stirred. Guilt, curiosity, memory. From across the path, Emily began walking toward them. Nicholas stood automatically, brushing off his pants and trying to steady himself. The moment she came close enough to meet his eyes fully, the rest of the world fell away. Hi, she said softly, her voice both familiar and cautious. Emily? His voice broke slightly as he said her name. I didn't know you were in New York. I could say the same, she replied, her tone unreadable. Emma looked up at them, her eyes darting between the two adults. You know each other? Emily gave a small nod. A long time ago. A long time, Nicholas echoed, but his gaze never left her face. He saw the subtle changes, more defined lines at the corners of her eyes, a quieter way of holding herself. But she was still her. Still the woman who once told him about her dreams of starting a children's reading center in underfunded cities, about how kindness was currency, about how small moments matter most. I didn't mean to. I wasn't expecting this, Nicholas said, struggling for words. Any of it. Neither was I, she said. He looked down at Emma again. Now that he really saw her, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The slope of her nose, the shape of her lips, even the way she tilted her head when she was curious. It was like watching echoes of his younger sister. And then he made the connection, the math, the timeline. 6 years ago, Lisbon, one night. His heart began to pound. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. This wasn't a question for a public park. Emily seemed to understand. She gently placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. Sweetheart, can you go pick a flower for me? Just one of those white ones over there. Take your time. Emma beamed. Okay. As soon as she skipped away toward the flower patch, the silence between Nicholas and Emily changed. It thickened, weighed down by something unspoken for far too long. Is she? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion, but not anger. Something sadder, quieter. Yes, she said. He staggered back a step, just slightly, as if the ground had tilted beneath him. Why didn't you? I did, she said. I wrote you. I didn't want to chase you or make demands. You never replied. The unread message. He remembered now. That stretch of weeks after Lisbon when he was flooded with press and investors and decisions that would change the course of his company forever. He'd seen the subject line, you deserve to know, but had marked it for later. Later never came. I didn't know, he said, breathless. Emily, I didn't know. I know, she replied. That's why I never came back again. They stood there, two people on opposite sides of an invisible canyon, neither of them sure how to cross it. She's amazing, he said after a moment. Smart, brave. She's everything, Emily said, her voice softening. And she's fine. I made sure of that. He nodded slowly, his mind overwhelmed with 1,000 questions. About Emma's life, about what she knew, about how to begin again. But none of them felt right just yet. None of them would undo what he'd missed. She doesn't know? He asked. Not the truth, Emily said. She thinks her dad was someone who died before she was born. It was easier that way. Nicholas swallowed hard. Do you want me to go? Emily hesitated. Then she shook her head. I think she might want you to stay. Nicholas didn't trust himself to speak. He simply nodded, his chest tight, his throat burning. He turned to see Emma running back toward them, a single wildflower held triumphantly in her hand. For you, Mommy, she announced, holding it out. Emily took it gently. Thank you, baby. Then Emma looked up at Nicholas and grinned. You didn't eat the cookie. He looked down. It was still in his hand. He raised it slowly, took a bite. It was warm and a little crumbly and slightly too sweet, and it tasted like the first real thing he'd had in years. Delicious, he said. Emma beamed, proud. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Nicholas Rain didn't feel like a stranger in his own story. He felt invited. Nicholas didn't sleep that night. Even after he returned to his luxury penthouse in Tribeca, surrounded by sleek silence and a view of the glittering skyline, his mind refused to settle. He lay awake staring at the ceiling. The image of Emma's smiling face burned into his thoughts. Every detail came back in waves. The way she had spoken to him without fear, the warmth of the cookie, the weight of Emily's gaze when she confirmed what he already suspected. She's yours. The words hadn't been spoken outright, but they didn't need to be. He had seen the truth in Emily's eyes. He had felt it in the way Emma moved, in the shape of her grin, in the way she tilted her head when she asked questions. Her very presence had stirred something in him that he didn't even realize had been missing. A quiet recognition, a primal knowing. This child was his, and he had missed everything. Her first steps, her first words, her first day of preschool, the way she curled into her mother's arms when she was scared. He had missed 7 years of a life that could have been his to help build. And for what? A company, awards, applause? He rolled over in bed, guilt sinking into his chest like a stone. He hadn't even read the email. That part haunted him more than anything. The subject line had stood out among hundreds of business messages, and he had made a mental note to return to it. But that was the week his board pushed through a major international merger. The week he had flown from Hong Kong to Berlin to New York in 4 days. It got buried, forgotten, and with it, the chance to be a father. By morning, he was still staring at the wall when the sun pushed its way through the curtains. He finally pulled himself out of bed, but everything he did felt mechanical. The espresso tasted bitter. The marble counters felt cold beneath his hands. His phone buzzed with backlogged messages from VPs and PR managers, but he ignored them. Instead, he searched for Emily Winston. She wasn't on social media, not under her real name, but he found a nonprofit blog where she was listed as a community outreach coordinator for a local literacy program. He recognized her photo instantly. There was a paragraph about her passion for children's reading access and another blurb about her proudest role being mother to a bright, imaginative daughter. Emma. He sat there staring at the screen. Then he closed his laptop. There were 2 options in front of him. He could walk away, like so many powerful men did. Say he wasn't ready, that the timing was bad, that he didn't know how. Or he could show up. Late, yes. Imperfect, absolutely. But honest, willing. He chose the second. By afternoon, he stood once again outside the small public library where Emily worked. The building was old but charming, nestled between a row of cafes and vintage shops, with ivy crawling up one side. He felt oddly out of place in his tailored coat and designer shoes, but he didn't care. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to begin. He waited until the front desk volunteer pointed toward a quiet room in the back where a children's storytelling hour was wrapping up. He peeked through the glass. There she was, Emily, seated in a low chair, surrounded by half a dozen children sitting crisscrossed on the rug. Emma was curled up on a cushion nearby, listening intently. She looked up as if sensing him, her eyes immediately meeting his through the window. She smiled, a small, innocent, open smile. He almost broke right there. Emily saw him next. Her smile faded, not in anger, but in recognition. She excused herself from the group and stepped outside into the hallway. I didn't expect you back this soon, she said. I didn't expect to be able to sleep if I didn't, he replied. They stood there quiet again, but the tension had changed. It was no longer charged with the fear of the unknown. It was filled with possibility. I looked up your work, he said softly. You did everything you said you would, and more. Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised. I'm not the only one. He shook his head. None of it matters. Not if I've missed out on her. You didn't choose to miss out, Nicholas. You just didn't know. But I should have, he said, voice low. I should have read the message. I should have followed up. I should have asked. I walked away like it was nothing. And it wasn't. It was everything. Emily sighed, her expression softening. I was angry at first, then sad. Then I realized resentment wouldn't raise a daughter. Love would, so I gave her everything I had. But I never hated you. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. I want to know her, he said. Not just say I'm her father. I want to earn it. I want to be there now. Emily nodded slowly. Okay, but it has to be on her terms. Of course. She doesn't need a savior, Nicholas. She needs someone who shows up. He met her gaze and finally understood what that meant. I'm staying, he said. She gave him a long look. Then come back tomorrow. She has a soccer game. It's not glamorous. It's muddy and chaotic, and half the time she's picking flowers instead of chasing the ball. He smiled. Sounds perfect. Emily stepped back into the room to finish the session, and Nicholas lingered by the door, watching his daughter giggle with the other children, her dark hair bouncing as she laughed. He didn't deserve this moment, but he was going to fight for everyone that followed. The morning of Emma's soccer game arrived gray and damp, with heavy clouds threatening rain. Nicholas stood in front of his full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of a casual button-down shirt he had never worn before. His usual uniform, tailored suits, luxury watches, polished shoes, felt absurdly out of place for a community park filled with juice boxes and folding chairs. Today he wore jeans, a light jacket, and sneakers. Still crisp, still clean, but something about the way he dressed now felt quieter. He didn't want to stand out. He wanted to belong. As he left his penthouse and made the drive across the city, his hands tightened around the steering wheel. His mind buzzed with nervous thoughts. What if Emma ignored him? What if she asked questions he wasn't ready to answer? What if she didn't want him there at all? He parked near the small neighborhood field, a patch of uneven grass with chalk lines and crooked goalposts. Families were already gathering, setting up lawn chairs and passing around thermoses of coffee. Kids in yellow and red jerseys ran in circles, laughing, tripping over soccer balls. It was chaotic, joyful, unfiltered life. Nicholas stood at the edge of it, momentarily overwhelmed by how loud the world sounded when it wasn't being managed. And then he saw her. Emma stood near the sidelines wearing a jersey 2 sizes too big, bright yellow socks, and a crooked ponytail. She had her hands on her hips, looking half-focused, half-distracted by a butterfly floating nearby. Nicholas smiled. Emily stood nearby, holding a reusable water bottle and talking to another parent. When she saw him, her face registered calm surprise. She walked over, her gaze soft but guarded. You came, she said. I said I would, he replied. She doesn't know yet, Emily added, that you're more than a new friend. Nicholas nodded. That's okay. I want to do this slowly. Emily pointed to the right. You can sit there, with the other parents. He followed her gesture to a row of collapsible chairs. They looked rickety and uncomfortable, but they also looked real. No leather, no polished steel, no executive function. Just people sitting, cheering for children, sipping lukewarm coffee, letting life happen. He chose the seat on the end and waited. The whistle blew. The kids scattered across the field in a blur of elbows and sneakers. Emma wasn't the fastest. She wasn't the loudest. She stopped twice to fix her sock and once to help a teammate up after they fell. She barely touched the ball, but Nicholas watched her like she was gold. At halftime, Emma trotted over to the sidelines, grabbing her water bottle. She spotted him. Her eyes widened. You came, she said brightly. He stood smiling. Wouldn't miss it. She grinned, then added, Did you see me almost kick the ball? I did. It was a strong, almost kick, he replied seriously. She giggled and ran back toward the team. Emily stepped up beside him, arms folded, watching her daughter with an expression that blended pride with weariness. Nicholas had never realized how much women carried until he saw it in Emily. In the way she managed everything quietly, invisibly, constantly. She's happy you're here, she said after a pause. I'm happy to be here, he said, meaning it more than he expected. She's easy to love, Emily added, voice low. But that doesn't mean it's easy to be consistent. She'll test you, not on purpose, just to be sure you're real. I want her to test me, he said. I want to earn her trust, not borrow it. Emily looked at him then. Really looked. You've changed. I had to, he answered. After the game, which ended in a chaotic 2-2 tie that no one seemed to care about, Emma ran up to him and tugged on his hand. Want to get ice cream? Nicholas looked at Emily. She gave a small nod. Absolutely, he said. They walked down the block to a tiny corner shop with a rainbow awning. Inside, the place smelled like waffle cones and childhood. Emma picked 2 flavors, cotton candy and chocolate chip. Nicholas got plain vanilla. She judged him for it immediately. Vanilla is boring, she declared. It's classic, he replied. You're weird, she grinned. They sat on a bench outside. Emma licked her cone with intense concentration. Nicholas watched her, memorizing the shape of her profile, the smudge of chocolate on her chin, the way she swung her legs under the bench. He cleared his throat. Can I tell you a secret? He asked. She looked up, intrigued. Okay. I wasn't always good at showing up, he said, but I'm trying to be better now. Emma didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment, eyes deep and thoughtful. Are you sad a lot? She asked. He blinked. Sometimes. I can tell, she said, but you don't have to be. I think you're good now. Nicholas's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. She scooted closer on the bench and leaned into his side. You can have the rest of my cone, she said. I already got the best bites. He laughed softly and took it from her. And in that moment, sticky-fingered, ice cream smeared, surrounded by passing cars and pigeons, Nicholas Rain felt something he hadn't felt in years. Home. The following week unfolded in ways Nicholas hadn't anticipated. Each day brought a new discovery, not just about Emma, but about himself. He found that his world, once dictated by calendars, metrics, and boardroom negotiations, now revolved around school pickup times, bedtime stories, and spontaneous questions about dinosaurs or planets. It was disorienting at first, humbling even, but it was also the most real thing he'd experienced in years. He started visiting Emily and Emma regularly. Not every day, not without notice. He was careful not to overwhelm them, but enough that Emma began expecting him. She would wait by the window in the evenings, sometimes with 2 cookies on a plate instead of 1. Emily noticed. Nicholas noticed. Neither said it out loud. One Thursday afternoon, Nicholas picked Emma up from school for the first time. He arrived early, heart pounding like he was about to deliver a keynote speech to thousands. When the bell rang, children came pouring out in wild, shouting waves, their backpacks bouncing as they ran toward parents. Then there she was, Emma, in a light blue jacket and pigtails, scanning the crowd until her eyes landed on him. She smiled, ran straight to him. You're really here, she said, grabbing his hand. Promised I would be, he answered, breathless with how much it meant. Can we go to the bookstore? Mommy always lets me read while she works, but she's busy today. Nicholas nodded. Absolutely. They walked together, hand in hand, her tiny fingers curled confidently around his. On the way, she told him about her day, how her teacher spilled coffee on the math test, how Timmy got his shoelaces stuck in the door, how she had a secret drawing in her backpack that she'd only show him if he asked very politely. When they arrived at the small bookstore cafe, she led the way inside like a regular. The shop was cozy, all wooden shelves and soft yellow lighting, with a little children's corner lined with beanbags and plush toys. Nicholas bought her a juice box and himself a coffee, then sat nearby while she dug through picture books, humming quietly. He couldn't remember the last time he had sat still for so long without checking his phone. For once, it stayed in his pocket. His world had narrowed down to this table, this coffee, and the sound of his daughter whispering to herself as she read aloud. After about 20 minutes, Emma brought over a book about the solar system and opened it on the table. Did you know Pluto used to be a planet, but then they changed their mind? She asked. I did, Nicholas said. It's still a planet to me, though. Emma nodded approvingly. Me too. Then she hesitated, looking down at the book. Can I ask you something weird? Anything. Were you always just A man in the park? Nicholas blinked. You mean, when we met? Yeah, I thought you were just a sad guy who needed a cookie, she said matter of fact. But then you came back. And then again. So, who are you, really? Nicholas leaned forward slowly, resting his arms on the table. He had rehearsed 100 versions of this moment in his head, but none of them involved a quiet corner of a bookstore and a child sipping from a juice box. I'm still that man in the park, he said, but I'm also more than that. I'm someone who made mistakes, big ones, and someone who missed a lot of things I should have been there for. Emma listened carefully. She didn't fidget or interrupt. I didn't know you existed until the day you gave me that cookie, he said. But now that I do, I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. She looked at him thoughtfully. You mean like, for real? Like forever? Nicholas swallowed. Yes, like forever. Emma leaned back in her chair. So are you my dad? Silence stretched between them. Nicholas met her gaze. She wasn't scared, just waiting. Yes, he said softly. I am. Emma didn't react right away. She stared at the book, then closed it gently. I kind of thought so, she said. Nicholas stared. You did? You talk like me. You have the same eyes as me. And Mommy always gets a weird look when she sees you, like she knows something I don't. Nicholas exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. Are you mad at me? He asked. She shook her head. I don't really remember stuff before I was 5, so I think I'm just glad you're here now. He blinked rapidly to stop the sting in his eyes. She reached out and grabbed his hand across the table. You're still kind of weird, she added, but in a good way. He laughed. I'll take that. That night, Emily called him after Emma was asleep. She told me what happened, Emily said. Her voice was quiet but not cold. She said you told her the truth. I couldn't lie to her, he said. She asked me directly, and she deserved an answer. There was a long pause. She also said you're weird, Emily added. Nicholas laughed. In a good way, I hope. She said it like it was the highest compliment she could give. And for the first time in his life, Nicholas Rain, the man who had earned 1,000 awards, been on 100 magazine covers, and spoken to crowds in the tens of thousands, finally felt like he had done something truly important. He told the truth, and he stayed. The rhythm of life changed slowly but unmistakably. In the weeks following the conversation at the bookstore, Nicholas began to take up quiet space in Emma's world, not as an intruder, not as a guest, but as someone gradually becoming part of the architecture. He didn't barge in with grand gestures or forced closeness. Instead, he did the smaller things, the things that mattered. He learned how to braid the ends of Emma's hair, badly at first, but she didn't seem to mind. He downloaded a weather app to track the best days to go to the park. He carried Band-Aids in his wallet because she once scraped her knee during tag and he didn't want to be unprepared again. He asked Emily for her allergy list and memorized it, even though Emma only had one mild sensitivity to mango, which she hated anyway. And every night after Emma went to bed, Nicholas would sit in his apartment, staring out over the glittering skyline of a city that once made him feel powerful and now made him feel incredibly small. Not in a bad way, in a grounding, honest, human way. He realized just how many years he had spent building things, empires, algorithms, partnerships, but not roots, not relationships. He had poured himself into his image, his legacy, and yet the most meaningful legacy of all had been growing up without him. One afternoon, Nicholas came to Emily's apartment to help fix a leaky faucet. He wasn't particularly handy, but he'd watched enough YouTube videos that morning to give it a try. Emma greeted him at the door like it was completely normal for him to be there, already mid-story about her science project on the solar system. Emily stood in the kitchen, folding laundry, watching him as he fumbled with the wrench and muttered under his breath. You know you could have just hired someone to do that, she said, smiling. I know, he grunted, but I kind of wanted to try. Plus, you told me not everything is about outsourcing. She raised an eyebrow. Didn't think you were listening. I listen more than I talk. I just didn't always act on it. He finished tightening the pipe and stood, wiping his hands on a towel. Emily handed him a glass of water. Their fingers brushed. It wasn't a romantic moment, not exactly, but it wasn't empty either. It was charged with something subtler, Familiarity, trust, a silent acknowledgement of everything unsaid between them. She loves you, Emily said suddenly, her voice quiet. I can see it, and you've been good with her. Better than I expected. Nicholas looked down at the water in his hands. Thank you. That means more than I can say. She also said she wants you to come to her school art night. Nicholas's eyebrows lifted. That's a big deal, isn't it? Very, Emily said with a grin. You'll be judged harshly if you don't clap loud enough. I'll bring earplugs so I can cheer without bleeding, he joked. Emily laughed, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed, and everything had. Later that night, after Emma had gone to sleep and Nicholas was about to leave, Emily walked him to the door. He hesitated there, one hand on the knob. I keep thinking about all the time I missed, he said, and I know I can't fix it, not really. But I want you to know, I'm not running from this. Not from her, not from you. Emily looked at him, long and hard. I believe you. He wasn't sure she would ever say those words. But now that she had, he felt like something inside of him finally unclenched. The next day he showed up to Emma's school for the art show with a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. He sat in the second row, between Emily and a dad who kept sneezing uncontrollably. When Emma's class walked onto the stage, she scanned the crowd quickly until she saw him. Her smile lit up the whole room. She wore a handmade crown made of glitter and stars and held up a painting of the solar system with one small figure floating near Saturn. When it was her turn to speak, she said, "This is my painting. It's space. It's big. But I'm not scared of space anymore, because now I know my dad is here on Earth." Nicholas felt everything stop. The room blurred. The applause faded. She had called him her dad, without prompting, without question. After the show, he knelt beside her and whispered, "I'm really proud of you." Emma threw her arms around his neck. "You clapped the loudest," she whispered. And as Nicholas held his daughter in a crowded school auditorium that smelled like paint and juice boxes, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a CEO or a man making up for lost time. He felt like a father. For real. And for once, that was more than enough. Autumn arrived quietly, slipping in under the heels of summer with golden leaves and colder mornings. The city began to change. Trees lining the sidewalks turned amber and red. Coffee shops replaced lemonade with cinnamon, and scarves reappeared like old friends. For Nicholas, the season felt like a reflection of his own life. Cooler, calmer, deeper. He still ran his company, still made decisions that shifted markets and influenced headlines. But those things no longer defined his identity. They were part of him, yes, but they weren't the best part of him anymore. The best part of him was Emma. One Saturday morning, Nicholas took Emma to the farmer's market. She wore a cozy yellow sweater and purple leggings with planets on them and held a tote bag far too big for her frame. She insisted on choosing vegetables, like grown-ups do, and spent 10 minutes talking to an old woman about the difference between yams and sweet potatoes. Nicholas watched her with wonder, constantly amazed by her confidence, her curiosity, and her humor. She was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with polish or perfection. She was fully herself, and somehow she trusted him enough to let him be a part of that world. As they walked back to Emily's apartment, Emma swung their joined hands and asked casually, "Do you think you'll still be my dad when I'm 16? Nicholas chuckled. "I plan on it, yeah, unless you fire me before then." She wrinkled her nose. "I might. Depends if you let me get a hamster." "I think I'd prefer a turtle," he said. "Turtles are boring. Turtles are low maintenance." "I'm not low maintenance," she replied proudly. He laughed again. You're definitely not." That afternoon, Emily invited Nicholas to stay for lunch. It had become routine now. His presence in their home, his plate at their table, his coat on the hook by the door. And yet nothing about it felt ordinary to him. Every moment still felt like something he was lucky to witness. While Emma disappeared into her room to work on a comic book series she was writing about a time-traveling bee, Nicholas and Emily sat on the couch with tea. The apartment smelled of roasted squash and garlic, and the soft sound of an old jazz record filled the space. "She talks about you constantly," Emily said, sipping from her mug. "Yesterday she told me she wants to name her first dog Nicholas too." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be honored or worried?" "Probably both." They shared a quiet laugh. Then Emily's tone shifted, just slightly. She also said something else, she added. She asked if we're a family now. Nicholas felt the weight of those words settle into his chest. Not in a heavy way, more like something that needed to be held carefully. "And what did you say?" he asked. "I said yes," she replied. "That families don't always look one way. That ours is still growing. But yes, and we're a family." He looked at her for a long time. The woman he once left behind. The mother he never knew he'd needed to know. The constant in a story that almost never was. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Of course." "I was terrified to come back," he admitted. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I thought I was too late. That I'd missed my only shot. That I didn't deserve this." Emily's eyes softened. "You were late, but not too late. And you're not perfect. But she doesn't want perfect. She wants present." "I'm trying," he said quietly. "You're doing." They sat in the stillness for a moment, letting that truth sink in. Then Nicholas leaned back, looking around the apartment, the books stacked unevenly on the coffee table, Emma's drawings taped to the fridge, the chipped mug in his hand that had become his. It all felt real. "I'm thinking of moving," he said suddenly. Emily looked at him, surprised. "From the penthouse?" He nodded. "It's beautiful, but it feels hollow. I want something closer, warmer. I want a place where Emma can leave her socks on the floor and I won't care. Somewhere I can cook breakfast and actually burn the toast and laugh about it." "Are you thinking about moving near us?" "I'm thinking about moving into this life fully," he said. "Whatever that means." Emily didn't reply right away, but her eyes said enough. Later that evening, after dinner, Emma fell asleep on the couch with her legs draped over Nicholas's lap. He sat there unmoving, one hand gently resting on her ankle, the other flipping through the comic she had started drawing for him. A girl with a yellow cape and a pet bee saving a sad businessman with a broken watch. He smiled at the dedication. To the man who was almost too late, but came just in time. Nicholas looked up and met Emily's gaze across the room. No words were exchanged. They didn't need any, because some truths didn't need to be spoken to be real. They were simply lived. The first snow arrived earlier than expected. One morning, Emma pulled open the curtains and gasped as the world outside had transformed overnight into a quiet, glowing blanket of white. Tiny flakes still floated down lazily from the sky, covering the rooftops, the trees, the sidewalk, and the garden below Emily's apartment window. She pressed her hands to the cold glass and squealed with delight. Nicholas was already there. He had come over early, bringing fresh bagels and hot chocolate in paper cups with her name scribbled in marker. Emma ran to him, wrapped in a blanket like a burrito, and tugged on his sleeve. "Can we build a snow person? Not a snowman, a snow person, with a cape. A snow hero," Nicholas said with a grin. "Absolutely." They spent the morning in the courtyard behind the apartment, Emma giving strict instructions as Nicholas rolled the heavy balls of snow into place. She insisted on sculpting a crown for the snow person, and Nicholas added buttons made of chocolate chips. Emily joined them partway through with scarves and gloves for everyone, and the three of them stayed outside for nearly an hour, laughing, freezing, and completely unaware of the passing time. Later inside, with socks drying on the radiator and Emma sipping her third cup of hot chocolate, the apartment felt full, not just of people, but of something deeper. Love, belonging, a kind of peace that none of them had known for a very long time. Emily moved through the space like she always had, efficient, gentle, always one step ahead. But Nicholas noticed the change in her now. Her movements weren't just graceful, they were relaxed, like she was finally sharing the weight she had carried alone for too long. As Emma sprawled on the floor, coloring, Nicholas stood near the window, watching the snow fall against the city. "I've been thinking about Christmas," he said, turning to Emily, "and maybe something more." She looked up, curious. "More than snowmen and cocoa?" "I want to take you both somewhere," he said. "Just for a few days. Out of the city. Somewhere quiet. A cabin, maybe. Fireplaces. Trees. A break from everything." Emily hesitated. "Nicholas, it's not a grand gesture," he said quickly. "No private jets or staff or gold bathtubs. I just want to spend time with you, with Emma. Like this, but with more stars in the sky." She smiled. "You always knew how to say the right thing when you really meant it." He stepped closer. I mean it now, more than ever. Christmas came, and they did go, to a small cabin in Vermont with creaky wood floors, a snow-covered porch, and a fireplace that Emma insisted on guarding like it was a dragon's lair. They played board games, burned cookies, took long walks through the pines. On Christmas Eve, Nicholas tucked Emma into bed in the loft and sat with her as she drifted to sleep. Before she closed her eyes, she whispered, "I think this is what a real family feels like." His heart clenched. "It is," he said, "and it's ours." He returned downstairs to find Emily reading on the couch. She looked up, and for a moment, they just watched each other. "You should know," he said, sitting beside her. "I've changed my will." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's a festive conversation." He smiled. "I mean it, not because I have to, but because I want Emma protected. Always. And because you're not just people I love. You're the only people that matter." Emily put her book down. "You came a long way, Nicholas." "I had a long way to come," he said. "But I'm here." This story was never about wealth or titles or grand revelations. It was about what happens after the missed chance. It's about redemption that doesn't come in one big moment, but through hundreds of small, intentional ones. Nicholas didn't get a happy ending because he was a billionaire, or because he said the perfect words. He earned it by showing up, again, and again, and again. For me, the most powerful part of the story is Emma, the little girl with the cookie who offered kindness without conditions. Her innocence wasn't just sweet, it was transformative. She reminded Nicholas, and hopefully the reader, that love doesn't demand perfection. It asks only for presence, honesty, and the willingness to begin again. Emily's quiet strength also speaks volumes. She didn't punish, didn't dramatize, didn't close the door forever. She protected her daughter first, and then cautiously allowed space for healing. Her grace is what made this story human. In the end, I didn't want Nicholas to win anything. I wanted him to understand what it means to love, to be needed not for his power, but for his presence. And when Emma calls him dad for the first time, unprompted, that's not just a moment of recognition. It's the moment the past is forgiven and the future begins. To me, that's the kind of ending that matters most. Not a perfect one, but a real one.